First of all, congratulations on making it to finals. Way to go. So I'm going to save thanks to the whole TAB staff and so on for the award ceremony. But I do want to single out the World Schools Debate TAB staff and give them a definite thank you. Paul Kennedy from Fishers. David Lures from Southport. And I'm the third part of the Three Stooges, Ralph Robinson from Westfield High. Definitely shout out to your parents, your coaches, the judges that came. Great job. You're going to hear more thanks at the award ceremony. I know you've heard this before. You're going to hear it in the awards. I want to say it again because it's huge. Marian University, who hosted this, gave us the great food, the facilities. Thanks, Marian. That's awesome for them. Thank you for us. So, let's get down to it. I want to introduce to you your 5 judges today. We have John Rooney, if you could wave, say hi. We have Shannon Watson. Thank you. Trevor Wells. And Bob Henshaw. And Matthew McGrath. Thank you guys for judging today. So, get everybody up to speed. This is an impromptu round. The topic was, this house would require an African American history course to be taught in high schools. For the prop, we have team S003, and for the op, AB 101. I have that right, don't I? Okay, good job. Well, without further ado, I'm going to step down, and we're going to watch these amazing teams fight for first.
Okay. I'm Grace Sauter. I'm the first speaker for Crown Point High School. Is my team ready? Right, my opponent's ready, and are my judges ready? Then I'll begin. The American education system has been a topic of debate and discussion within the United States and many other countries. The U.S. is a world superpower, and many look to us for guidance. It is imperative to provide a well-rounded and cultured education to ensure that our youth, our future leaders, can adequately lead the world toward a future of equality and prosperity. This house would require an African American history course to be taught in high schools because schools currently don't provide adequate African American based history. Not requiring these classes is a proponent of continued systemic and individual racism, and because African American historical achievements are significant contributions to America's overall success. Before I begin, I would like to clarify that the motion does not state that this must be a required class for students to take, only that students must have the option to take this course. We would also like to impose a burden on the negation. They must prove that the motion, if implemented, would negatively affect the learning environment of schools by providing examples of how specific detriments, as well as how it impairs learning. Our school features a variety of unique and varied classes, including many history classes, such as AP European History, AP World History, as well as US History classes. However, most schools fail to offer a course that teaches the history and culture and achievements of African Americans. As I've already brought up, it is very important for our students to have varied education that better prepares them to lead our world. In my own school career, I can clearly remember the main aspects of each history class I've taken since middle school. I learned about the philosophical ideas of Confucius, the daring deeds of Alexander the Great. I learned about the trials and tragedies of people across the world, as well as their achievements. However, very little of this time was spent discussing the rich and varied history of African Americans. How can we expect our future to be led by open-minded and well-rounded individuals when we're not allowing them to reach their full education potential? Furthermore, when the lives of African American people is taught, we only learn of things like slavery and the Jim Crow laws, their oppression. We only learn about the times when they were victims. This, of course, is very important to learn and acknowledge. However, it creates a mindset that the only significant part of African American history has been their tragedies. In reality, African Americans have made significant contributions to music, to art, and politics. America seems to be intent on continuing this way of education. Just recently, Indiana proposed an education bill that would further limit what's being taught in schools. This goes to show that our schools need to focus on better educating our nation's children so that we are not left ignorant. This brings me to my second contention. Keeping African American history out of schools is a proponent of continued and systemic racism. I am sure that many of us have interacted with individuals who are continuously closed-minded. How do we remedy this? It has been proven historically that when we educate a population, we're able to learn from past mistakes. Knowing a significant portion of African American history keeps our nation from falling back into times of intense... Yes?
The title of your contention implies that we don't already teach African American history in schools. Is that true?
I would argue that the motion does not imply this. The motion is saying that we would have a course that is specifically focused on African American history. We do already teach some African American history, though like I stated, a lot of it is focused on the victimization of African Americans rather than their achievements and their accomplishments and their contributions to, like I said, to art, politics, and music. Knowing a significant portion of African American history keeps our nation from falling back into times of intense, widespread racism. I would propose that history humanizes people. Learning about the achievements of our founding fathers and many other influential leaders of this country has helped me to view them, as well as others, as people. I spent time reading about their personal lives, and some of these individuals, and it has greatly served to help me see them in a more intimate and empathetic light. Similarly, education can be used to inspire others. Personally, knowing about the lives of early feminists has helped me as a woman to feel more confident in myself. Why do we continue to deny the opportunity to learn about their history and therefore be inspired to students of color? Yes?
So again, I want to point out what Megan was trying to say, basically, that the title of your contention implies that African American studies are kept out of school. Can you point to how they are being kept out of school?
So as I've already stated a few times, we focus greatly in our schooling system on world history, on just general U.S. history. There isn't a set course. We even focus on European history so that all of the students of European descent can learn about their own history of their ancestors. However, we don't have like a specific course that focuses on the lives of the African American community, the African American population in this country. Why do we feel it is unimportant to provide students with the opportunity to learn about their own history intimately? We do believe that it is vitally important to make sure that these students are learning about their history. Therefore, we stand in proud affirmation of the motion and sincerely hope that you judges will decide to as well. Thank you for your time and attention.
Opposition ready? Judges ready? And my lovely team, are you ready? Perfect. My name is Megan Chen, and I will be the first speaker for the opposition. My time begins now. My name is Megan Chen, and my last name implies something that I'm extremely proud of. Yes, I'm half Chinese. And as a half Chinese person, I would hope that in my United States history courses, I would learn adequately about my people's residency in the United States of America. Unfortunately, I found in these United States history courses that this was not true. What I would have liked to have seen as a student in my school would be a required course teaching more of my peers and myself about the history of my people. And we believe, as the opposition, that expanding United States history is extremely important. We oppose the motion this House would require an African American history course to be taught in high schools. Our case is built around 3 contentions. The first 2, no solvency and teaching, will be delivered now, and our third contention, global application, will be reviewed by our second speaker. We define taught to mean offered to students. We propose a counter mechanism as the opposition, that African American history, along with the histories of other notable American ethnic minorities, will be taught in all United States history courses. We place the burden on the opposition to prove that requiring an African American history course to be taught will achieve the goals of the course better than our proposed counter mechanism does. Contention 1, no solvency. African American history is incredibly important in order to understand systemic racism and the original sin of the country, slavery. As the opposition, we understand this. Offering an African American history course that is not required to be taken does not ensure that students will understand history in its fullest. However, we now place a mechanism saying we want to instead expand United States history, which is generally a required course. This means that the subject would reach more students, and we would cover not only African American history, but history of more minorities under our mechanism. As a Chinese American, I've never received extensive Asian American history. Public education has failed to educate myself and my peers on my people's history. Sub A, U.S. history is mandated in most places as in our state. The course is widespread, and including more education in this course will educate students much better. Furthermore, the intersectionality offered by the mechanism ensures broader education. Because U.S. history is so broadly taught, we provide solvency for more knowledgeable students. Just offering one course to be taught does not guarantee that students will receive this vital information. The OP provides better educated students. Subcontention B. Offering a separate course is counterintuitive. This separate course would only continue to gather interest of students already interested. It is good to expand on the topic, but everyone needs to be receiving this vital information. In the South, instances of referring to the Civil War as Northern aggression or referring to slaves as workers is detrimental, and expanding a mandated course to include minority history can help these areas to know better. We understand that some students are incredibly interested in African American history, and we encourage them to pursue these studies. But we want to push for more outreach for students who might not necessarily be interested in order to ensure they're properly educated to provide solvency for the issues in our country. Contention 2, teaching. Subcontention A, burden on schools. Requiring a class about African American history to be taught in all high schools would be an extreme burden to all schools, because they would have to hire teachers with comprehensive knowledge in African American studies, something the prop clearly believes we do not have enough of as a society. We only have one African American studies teacher in our school, which offers an extensive amount of classes, proving the rarity of such a qualified teacher. To require schools to teach this course would mean an extreme increase in demand for people who are both knowledgeable in African American history and qualified to teach students in high school. Aside from having to hire a full new teacher in most cases in the long term, the burden in the short term after enacting this motion would be extreme. Monetary costs, exacerbated by extreme demand, would be too much to ask of schools. Usually, when there is a curriculum requirement change added, it's implemented with more flexibility for teachers and workshops and support. U.S. history has this support. However, creating a whole new course will be a worse burden on schools than expanding upon curriculum. Creating a separate African American course with little precedent to work with is difficult for schools. Schools in the status quo find it difficult to get funding. Creating a new course is too much to ask. Subcontention B, better United States history teachers. Instead of teaching a whole new class on African American history, Schools, under our mechanism, would teach more expansive U.S. history courses to accurately educate students about minority groups within United States history. This, instead of requiring a whole new teacher with specialized knowledge, would require better qualified U.S. history teachers. These teachers would have to be knowledgeable about African American history, which I'm sure the prop agrees is not already happening enough. If African American history was taught, knowledge on the subject would remain required only within a specialized teacher. Instead, knowledge of this history would go to teachers who have a larger outreach and should already be educated in this already. By having more educated United States history teachers who also have this larger outreach to a population of students, we can solve the issues in our American society that are caused by the lack of knowledge about African American history. This is extremely important. We want to expand United States history classes, not keep the interest in African American history within a specialized group. And under our mechanism, and under our two contentions, this is why we urge a ballot in the opposition. Thank you. Are my judges ready to proceed? Negation, are you ready? Affirmation? All right, then let's begin. I would like to dedicate the opening minutes of my speech to rebutting some of the points brought up by the negation. For starters, I want to touch upon a rebuttal that they made against our first speaker, in which they stated that the motion implies that African American history is kept from schools. However, we wanted to clarify by saying that what we are instating is that it's not kept from schools, but it is limited in quantity, especially relative to other ethnicities and races. And by passing our motion, we would be improving and allowing for more education of African American history. But we are not saying that it is entirely kept from schools, just that there is not enough as it stands. Moving forward, in their first contention, they talked about teaching African American history within U.S. history courses. However, this actually solves the burden they place on us and how this would better teaching for African American history, because there's only 180 school days in a year. And if you've ever taken an American history class, I know for me personally, I'm in AP U.S. history right now, and it is absolutely jam-packed with content. Every day we are taking an hour's worth of notes on new topics every single day. Yes?
Oh, okay. So you wouldn't be in favor of expanding U.S. history to perhaps cover 2 years? In Indiana, we only have to have 3 credits of social studies. Would another year not be beneficial?
But what about all the other courses? I know for our school there's kind of a plan that you take where if you want to follow the AP track, for example, there's already 4 classes that you would take to encompass all of those things. So then by doing that, if you made it U.S. history 2 years, then you would be taking away from one of those other courses. Yes, you have another quick point?
Okay, perfect. So you're prioritizing other courses over expansion of U.S. history to involve minority history?
Yeah, I'm saying it is not necessary to expand U.S. history when we could just create another course, which is what we are stating.
Thank you.
Now, that is not to say, of course, that we are prioritizing one or the other. We're just saying it's not necessary to create an entire new school year worth of American history when we could just make a separate course for African American history, which is what we are trying to accomplish. Moving forward, within their first contention, they talked about, the first speaker brought up her relation to her Chinese ethnicity and how she believes that our education system has failed to really delve into Asian history. But the motion would not deter this, and in fact, it would actually open the door for us to additionally create courses that would teach things like Asian history, or if we wanted to be even more specific, perhaps we can make 1 semester courses that would encompass specific ethnicities. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you have a link to that?
A link to what?
To prove that creating an African American course is going to create courses for other minorities?
Well, because, again, why not? Why? This would open the door for it. If we can create a course specifically for African Americans, like we've already said, we already have courses specifically dedicated to European history, so why not create specific courses dedicated to African American history, and by extension, then Asian history? Moving forward, finally, I wanted to quickly touch on their second contention before I move into the constructive portion of my speech. I want to talk about how they stated that there would be a need for more teachers if we were to implement this course. However, we wanted to kind of ask the rhetorical question of why is it a bad thing to encourage others to learn about African American history? Would it not encourage more people to become educators on this topic, thereby increasing and optimizing education of African American history? Now that we have thoroughly discussed the negation's first 2 points, I would now like to introduce you to the affirmation's third contention, which is that African American historical achievements are significant contributors to America's overall success. As one of our overarching themes of our affirmative case, American history, or African American history, is American history, and yet for decades African American contributions to our society have been fundamentally and consistently downplayed, or worse, blatantly ignored. Of course, there are a few examples of African American accomplishments that have obtained the recognition they deserve, such as the civil rights work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, but beyond these prominent figures, there are a plethora of other individuals who remain unacknowledged despite their influential roles in shaping broader American history. One such person was an African American man named James Anderson. Anderson served in the Army during the Vietnam War, and until during one battle, he selflessly threw his body on a grenade to alleviate the explosion, saving the lives of his Army brethren in the process. He became the first African American in U.S. history to be awarded the Purple Heart, the highest recognition in the military. Anderson earning the greatest honor was not only a victory for the specific battle he was in, but moreover, he made history by setting the precedent of finally awarding African Americans the Purple Heart when deserved. Despite this, allow me to ask you a question. When I said the name James Anderson, how many of you knew who I was talking about? If I had to take a wild guess, likely not many or none. It would be ignorant of us to fail to acknowledge. It would be ignorant of us and a profound disservice to the African American community if we fail to acknowledge figures like Anderson, whose stories need to be heard to provide a comprehensive understanding of African American influence on America's broader history. Additionally, another great example of this that doesn't focus on one specific figure, but rather a collection of figures, is the abolitionist movement and its correlation to the women's rights movement. Now, if you have taken an American history class, you probably remember a big facet of the abolitionist movement was the fact that it was linked with the women's rights movements, and the two stood in arms trying to help one another. Without the abolitionist movement, which was of course backed by African Americans, then the women's rights movement would not have made the strides that it did without that help. It's imperative to acknowledge this because, once again, something as monumental as obtaining women's rights, eventually gaining suffrage, etc., would not have been accomplished without the assistance of African Americans backing the cause. And yet we never recognize the figures and the groups of African Americans who helped make that possible, proving why, as our contention states, African American historical achievements are significantly downplayed or even ignored, especially when they contribute to America's overall success. And with that being said, thus for this reason, I urge you to vote in favor of the affirmation. Thank you all for your time and attention.
Are my judges ready? And my talented team? All right. In that case, my time is going to start now. Judge, in this speech, I will review the opposition's third contention, global applications, and then I will move on to present rebuttals to my opponent's contentions. Contention 3, global applications. The opposition acknowledges the importance of teaching white American students about their African American peers, which is why our mechanism seeks to require it through American history courses. We, however, see little benefit to requiring these courses to be offered abroad. Why should we teach about an American ethnic minority in countries that relate to neither? After all, Judge, what benefit do you see in teaching Middle Eastern French history or Jewish Chinese history here in America? You have to agree that it makes more sense to cover these topics in an overall French studies or Chinese studies course. This is the struggle that international schools see under this motion. When we require international schools to offer a course regarding an American ethnic group, we place an undue strain on schools to employ a qualified instructor. After all, Judge, considering how hard it is to find an American African American Studies teacher, how can we expect to find an Indian or German African American Studies teacher? Judge, this debate forum is world schools, and nowhere does it say in the motion that only American schools would have to meet this requirement. It is less than feasible here, but it is completely ridiculous to propose for foreign schools. There is no reason to compel all schools to offer an African American Studies course when they could so much more easily cover it in a U.S. history elective, as our counter-mechanism proposes. The strength of this counter-mechanism, not right now please, the strength of this counter-mechanism domestically is that it requires students to learn about African Americans in U.S. history. And the strength of it abroad is that it falls under a non-required elective that interested students can apply for. By the proposition, we harm foreign schools by forcing them to offer a course for which teachers will be hard to come by and by which students will have no context for. Under our opposition, we ensure that education will be adaptable to location and that the studies will exist in their proper context. Now I am going to move on to present rebuttals to my opponent's contentions. First, I want to address the burden in the speech. We reject their burden to prove that our opposition will harm American schools because our opposition is proposing to do better.
Yes. Okay. So your guys' proposal here is to elongate the U.S. history courses to be 2 years. That way they can encompass the African American history. Yet now you're bringing up that this is world schools. Have you guys considered the fact that other countries do not offer a U.S. history course to begin with? Therefore, you guys say that this is required and therefore it'll reach more students isn't even applicable to that facet of your argument because other countries don't offer a U.S. history course to begin with?
Okay, so I just want to point out really quickly that they've misunderstood our counter mechanism, by the way. My partner proposed the 2-year thing in a rebuttal to one of their points, but we're not proposing a 2-year course. There are in fact alternatives that I'm going to move on to later in this speech, but also, as I literally just explained, the fact that it will be an elective overseas is an asset to foreign schools. Requiring them overseas would be bad. U.S. history is only required here. So, as I said, it gives adaptability. Now, like I said, we reject their burden because their burden proposes that we would harm schools. We're saying that we help schools more than they do. I also want to point out that they rejected neither our counter mechanism nor our burden in their second speech, which is when they would have been required to do it, so we will assume both stand. We've just spoken about the counter mechanism, but I do want to remind you that the burden that we place on them is to prove that requiring an African American history course to be taught will achieve the goals of the course better than our proposed counter mechanism does. Now, moving on to specific points. They spoke about how already in America we don't provide an adequate education when it comes to African American history, and I just want to say, really clearly, we totally agree with this point. However, our case seeks to make American students even more well-rounded than theirs by requiring American students to take this course. They also spoke about contributions and the history of African Americans. And to all of this, I say similar things. We acknowledge this, and these points actually flow to our side because our case has a larger scope when it comes to teaching students these things. We are prioritizing more people to be taught about African American history because it humanizes African Americans, as the proposition has said. They also spoke about systemic racism. And I just want to clarify on something that happened during a POI. Their contention is titled that African American history is being kept out of schools. They misunderstood Megan's POI. No one ever said that the motion implied this. Yeah.
Okay, I can actually give you the exact wording of our contention.
Please do.
Any miscommunication. It is school curriculums currently do not provide adequate African American history. So nowhere in there does it say that it does not offer it at all.
Okay, thank you. So as I said, in their second contention, they did say, and I quote, that it's being kept out of schools, and this is a minor point, so I'm not going to spend much more time on it, but I do want to say that we were never referring to the motion, we were referring to the language of their contention. African American studies, no thank you. African American studies are not kept out of schools, they're just being taught poorly, which is what our case solves better than theirs. And now, so basically just to summarize, all of the points that they proposed have fallen by my second speech. Basically, all of their points about inadequate education and systemic racism and the history of African Americans fall to our counter mechanism because all the problems they propose are better solved by our case, so they all of their points flow to our side. Basically, like every single problem they proposed about like getting people to know more about the contributions of African Americans and making sure that people are sensitive to this history is better achieved by putting this education into already required U.S. history courses. Instead of like requiring schools to offer it as an elective but not forcing anyone to take it. Basically, that's all I have to say about their case. But moving on to explain why their rebuttals are not effective when it comes to our case, the small rebuttal they mounted to our counter mechanism falls because they said that no inclusive course could exist in 1 year, but I do want to highlight one really awesome course that does exist in 1 year at my high school. It's called American Experience. It talks a lot about the African American experience in American history, and it is a 1-year course. So this idea that it's totally impossible to offer a course like that, like I've taken it, so it clearly isn't.
Yeah, so that sounds like the course we're proposing, where we teach American history and it's at your school, and you're saying it's so beneficial. So why would we require something like that for all schools?
That's exactly what our counter mechanism is. Your proposition is requiring an African American studies elective to be offered at every school. Our counter mechanism proposes incorporating it into American history, which is required.
Can I ask a follow-up?
No, thank you. And so they also failed to like rebut our no solvency point at all. I didn't hear any addressing of it in the second speech, so again, don't consider it. Basically what I want to leave you with is that this opposition gives more scope to the proposition while requiring less of teachers. We are requiring a good history to be learned, not just taught, which is why I urge you to vote in the opposition. Thank you.
Judges, are you ready? Engagement ready?
Yes.
Teammates ready? All right. My name is Thomas Bello, and I'm the third speaker for the affirmation side of this debate. I'd like to begin by saying that first I will be going over the criticisms that were proposed towards our contentions, and then go over our issues with the contentions given to us by the negation. First, I would like to introduce by saying that yes, we did not reject the verdict because our plan solves it. The course that we propose would be more beneficial into learning African American studies, and this would happen because it would be a course more specifically designed towards this. When you have a course that is overloaded with information and overloaded with things that will be in each unit, you will tend to remember less of it. It will be an overload of information, and students will take shortcuts to learn it instead of finding actual ways to know the information that is being presented to them at this time. I would also like to point out that the negation keeps going back and forth between what they are proposing that we do. First, they propose that it would be integrated into the normal U.S. history course, and this would change the curriculum and incorporate it there. Then, they propose that if we need to, it will become a 2-year course. This would not be an option if we are to use their overseas example for the U.S. history. Yes?
So, judges, I just want to make it really clear that the 2-year thing was a rebuttal that Hannah leveled to one of their points. It has never been part of their case, and don't let them tell you otherwise.
With that, I would then like to go towards something that they continue to misquote about our argument. We have never claimed that currently there is that all information about African Americans are being kept at a school. Where they most likely got this from was when we referenced an Indiana bill that is currently going through legislation that could keep more info out of schools, that could potentially keep more information about the history of African Americans out of current school. What we were saying with this and the information of African Americans being from schools is we were saying that the current information that is being given focuses on the strife and the issues that they have faced in their time in America. And this is something very important to learn. It is important to know about the racism that has occurred, and it is important to know about the struggles that they have faced due to what has happened in America. However, we propose that in this new course, so that we may focus more, a new course must be created so that we are not overloading information in this American history course, and instead we have a course that focuses on the achievements that were made, like in the Army, like in many parts throughout American history. Yeah.
So I just want to make it really clear. You are prioritizing a more in-depth class, regardless of how many or rather how few students will take it, over a class that is required so that every student will have to see African American history.
If we are to say that, and let's look at this. If we say that within each school there may be a differing number of students that are interested in this. Throughout America, there are many classes that are taught, that are in high schools that are taught, that have varying number of students that are attributed to it. However, this is solved by the high schools because they split up their funding in order to prioritize the classes that require more students to take part. Take, for example, classes such as speech and debate. There are some schools in which put less of their funding towards these classes because there are less students who would like to take it. However, these classes are still something that are available at the majority of schools, if not all. And because of this, it is not unfair to say that this could be a similar thing with this proposed African American History Studies course. I would then like to go into more contentions. With their first contention of solvency, I believe that going in depth about how that the course will teach more than adding it into the history course, I believe that does address that claim. The second contention about teachers is that when we do prioritize this course by requiring it in high schools, it will then motivate people in order to learn more about it. This will also go as far as to create more jobs for people who are experts in this field. If they are an expert in this field, they may not have a job which is able to correctly give them a place to teach what they learn. Yes.
Do you have a link for that?
What do you mean?
I need more specifics on how this is going to particularly create more jobs. Like maybe a number of jobs, because like we're offering one course.
I do not have a number of the amount of high schools which would offer this course, because I do not. I believe you're asking for the amount of jobs to create the amount of teachers that would be needed for this. I do not have an accurate representation of the amount of high schools that there are, and so I do not have a number for that. A quote from Bruce Lee says that, "I fear not the man who has practiced 1,000 kicks one time, but the man who has practiced one kick 1,000 times." It is better to ask someone who is an expert on a topic than to ask someone who is an expert on something that is generally related to the topic. If you are to hire a history professor who is knowledgeable on the American history, it is not. Yes.
But like you understand that one of our entire contentions bases around the fact that experts are extremely few and far between, especially abroad. So like proposing that we have this super specialized elective that's taught by like a college professor is super unfeasible, right?
And so I respond to this by saying that when this is required, it will make it something that more people will learn about. And so by this, more people will learn, and as time goes on, we will need more professors
Can I have
who.
a follow-up?
Sure thing. Last one.
So you understand you have to start somewhere, right? Like this might create more jobs after we get through a few generations of people learning it, but to institute it now, you have to find those teachers somewhere, and that's not solving for that problem.
And you are right. In order to teach this, we need to start somewhere. We need to start somewhere in order for this information to get out. We need to start somewhere in order for this knowledge to be something that is general knowledge for students. We need to start somewhere in order to be able to give students this extensive knowledge of African American history that needs to be given. And then I would then like to reference, again, the misquoting of us saying that currently African American history is kept completely out of schools. This is something that we never said in our case, and we do not suggest is something that is currently true. We would also like to bring up that with our burden being rejected, it stands to reason that negation does not have a way to say that if these courses are implemented, that it would negatively affect the students. And so if it is not something that would negatively affect, and we can cite many positives towards this course being implemented, how they would be able to learn more and learn better of this African American history, it stands to reason that I stand in firm affirmation of the motion. Thank you.
I'm going to assume that everyone's ready, and my time is going to start now. So Judge, I'm going to clarify on burdens and mechanisms, and then I'm essentially going to go back to the point that everyone cares about. Who has access to their contentions? Who's going to end up flowing them over to their side in the end? So first things first, on this mechanism. So they never refuted our mechanism in our second speech, so our mechanism still stands. We're very clear that we are going to be offering, we are just going to be incorporating more knowledge into a United States history course. We have actually already explained how this has been done in the past. The example my partner Emerson provided with Amex, which is a U.S. history course, but it focuses on minorities' experiences in the country. So this is a course that is able to cover all this information in 1 year. Now, it's important to recognize the differences between these two courses that we're offering right now. So the proposition is offering one singular course that only focuses on African American history. We are going to offer a course that is required by all students to take, so this material is going to be seen by a far larger audience. And indeed, we're going to expand it to encompass the experiences of more minorities than just African Americans. So the difference is we're not going to be able to provide as in-depth information on African American history because this is 1 year course and it is just broader information that we're covering. But we're going to weigh this as a better impact for us because although the information that we're providing isn't quite as in-depth, it's still broader information that everyone needs to know. So this is far more important to the country than offering one class that's going to offer a lot of specifics, mind you, but isn't going to be quite as important. The impact isn't quite as large here. So Judge, remember this, that our course, the impact that we're offering, because it's going to be seen by a much larger audience, is going to actually be better for the country and for the future. It's going to provide a much better education for students. Now, to move on, to clarify on the burden, we place the burden on the proposition to prove that requiring this course to be taught will achieve the goals of the course. And so we're just going to say right now that we have better access to this. The goal of the course in their entire case encompasses this, but especially in their second contention, they explain how not offering this is continuing systemic racism. So what this whole debate is really about is who's going to better help to educate students on the history of minorities and the history of race in our country. We are going to have better access to this, Judge, because once again, this course has a much larger audience. So yes, their example their African American history course is going to be seen by students and the specifics might be covered better, but the broader audience that we have is a much more important impact. So they don't reach this burden and instead we do. We are going to provide better solvency here. Yes.
So are you suggesting that we water down history in order to reach a larger audience?
No, of course not. Well, to clarify, I just think that obviously we can't spend as much in-depth time on each particular instance. So, we're not going to be able to get into as many figures in African American history. I grant this. But, watering it down is kind of equivocating. You're implying that, we're not going to cover important history topics. The American Experience course that Emerson references is actually very specific in clarifying the burden that slavery has placed in our country. And the importance of, covering different minority experiences is going to better help American students today understand the world around them. And I think we're providing better solvency for this as well. Once again, a larger audience and a more comprehensive course. We're providing more material, even if it is slightly more general. I think that's okay because in the long run, we're providing better solvency. The impact is much larger on the opposition side. So I've clarified that they have not reached our burden because we reach it much better. And I also want to clarify that we don't accept their burden. They said we need to prove that offering this course is going to cause harm. And while it does cause harm, what's more important here is that our course is going to be much better. We're looking for more out of this course, okay? So what we're looking for is a United States, U.S. history course that is going to be much more comprehensive. We're just going to get more out of this, Judge. Essentially more bang for your buck. Now to clarify, we've talked about teachers. And we talked about the burden that an African American history course would place on schools, and this is particularly important. We already have United States history teachers that are very qualified, and in order to expand U.S. history, all we would have to do is create more seminars. But we don't currently have enough qualified teachers to place a teacher that is qualified to teach a very specific African American history course in every single high school. This is just unfeasible. And not only is it unfeasible, like in the domestic US, once again, we're talking about world schools. So I remind you, Judge, that the proposition is telling you that they're also going to offer this African American history course all around the world. All around the world, there are now teachers qualified to teach this course. So, Judge, this places an undue burden on schools, whereas our plan is not going to place this burden, and is in fact going to improve education for the United States and for the world. Now, so this is what I'm talking about here. We're essentially battling over who's going to provide more solvency, because that's essentially what the proposition's case is about preventing racism, and what we're trying, well, sorry, not preventing, but learning more about racism. What we're trying to do here is teach more, and we're prioritizing more learning over specific learning. Remember, this is going to be feasible because we have the example of the American experience. And furthermore, this is going to be feasible because we have teachers that are prepared to do so. It's going to take less effort to educate U.S. history teachers on how to teach some more provisions than it is to actively go out and recruit teachers that are going to be teaching these African American history courses. So, Judge, first of all, we're providing more solvency because we're reaching a much broader audience. We're also not placing an undue burden on schools. Now, to move on, my proposition has not actually rebutted or touched on our third contention about globalization. I'm going to say this once again, this is world schools. So the proposition, the motion here that the proposition is proposing is saying that we want to offer African American history courses to be taught in high schools all around the world. This doesn't make sense. This is like asking the United States to teach a specific course that must be offered in every single high school on like African French history. It doesn't make sense, it's not applicable. But what we do is we're ensuring that U.S. history courses all around the world are just going to be more comprehensive about the history of racism. So when we offer this more comprehensive view, we're obviously providing better education for U.S. students, but furthermore, anyone who's taking U.S. history courses in the international community, in any other countries, is also going to see this improved benefit. Their course is not just going to be about the admittedly more white-centric U.S. history courses that we've been seeing, but instead it's going to be far more comprehensive. It's going to allow all students to learn about U.S. history from multiple different perspectives. And this, Judge, is incredibly important. This is how we're providing so much more solvency. This is a broader audience. It's not placing undue burdens on schools. It's just going to be better for this, protected time. It's just going to be better for the state of education. And in this way, we're providing solvency for racism education, not only in the United States, but abroad. Judge, this is why it's so important, and this is why we win the impacts of the prop's case, because we have better solvency and we have better access to these contentions. That is why I urge a vote in the opposition. Thank you so much.
Opposition ready? Judges ready? Team ready? All right. Then my time starts now. In this speech, I will first be going over the mechanisms and the burdens and why we win on them. Next, explaining the points of clash and why we win on those. And then finally, taking a look back at our contentions and why we continue to win on those as well. Now first, let's address the mechanism. The proposition accepted our counter mechanism, and let me reiterate it to you. We propose a counter mechanism as the opposition that African American history, along with the histories of other notable American ethnic minorities, be taught in all United States history classes. This mechanism was never rejected, and therefore we assume they accept it. Now I'm going to address the counter burden they placed on us. It was to prove that the motion would negatively affect schools. And we're rejecting this burden because it implies that our case hurts schools, and we're trying to provide solvency for these very same problems that the proposition introduced in their case. Next, I'm going to address the burden that we placed on them. We placed the burden on the proposition to prove that requiring an African American history course to be taught will achieve the goals of this course. Now, they accepted the burden, but they never provided better solvency to this burden than we did. In fact, we reach this burden better than they do. But now I'm going to look at the points of clash in this debate. First of all, the proposition's main rebuttal was that U.S. history could not feasibly be taught in 1 year with such expansive info. And we've rebutted this by providing an example. American experience, which Emerson has taken and knows that it provides an expansive knowledge about African American history. It's an example to prove that this is possible to integrate into United States history, and it's an example that we should follow. But next I'm going to address the point that all of their contentions basically flow to us. Their contention that we don't have enough African American studies. Their contention about systemic racism that needs to be addressed. Their contention about African American history being American history. We agree with every single one of these problems, and we provide better solvency to all of them. In fact, we understand that we provide better solvency because their class only targets interested people. It's an elective class. It's not required to be taken in school. And that means only a small handful who are already interested and would already study this anyways would be taking the class. Yes, we understand that a more in-depth class would cover more information, but it is so much less impactful than a required course that would cover the people that actually need to learn about this in order to solve the problems in our country. Because of this, it doesn't warrant requiring a school to first hire a teacher and then ask students to take this class. But finally, I'm going to go over our contentions and why we went on them. First of all, our contention that providing an African American history course, in fact, requiring it, does not provide solvency to the issue because it only reaches out to specialized students who are already interested. And this point was never rebutted by the proposition. Next, our contention about teaching, that it's a burden on schools, especially in the beginning, when there's a huge rarity in teachers that will know a lot about African American history. And in fact, they agreed with this point. We also state that this will provide better United States history teachers, which I think we can all agree is a benefit to our schools. And then finally, our point about globalization, that it's not feasible to ask schools to do this overseas because it would be better for us to not require this. This point was never rebutted. Let me reiterate, it was never rebutted by the proposition. And because they never rebutted this contention, as well as points in our first and second contentions, they still stand. I want to reiterate that this case is impacts-based. We provide better solvency to every single one of the issues presented in the proposition's case. And because their studies course only targets interested people, and ours will target a wide variety, that is why we urge a ballot in the proposition. Thank you. Opposition, sorry. Are my judges ready to proceed? Opponents, are you ready? All right, then let's begin. As the fourth and final speaker of the proposition, I have the obligation to review all of the major points of clash presented throughout the duration of this debate and explain why ultimately the affirmation's points stand while the negations fall. To start out, we want to present the point of clash in which they stated that encompassing or elongating U.S. history courses to incorporate African American history was quote-unquote not part of their point and that this was not what they were advocating for. However, their first contention, they literally stated that they wanted to teach African American history within U.S. history courses. Now, not only will this not be practical because there are only 180 days in a school year and history courses are already jam-packed with content that adding new content would not be plausible, but additionally, the way in which they described their American Experience course, and perhaps they did not describe it properly, but the way they described it to us sounds exactly as though what we are proposing, where we have a separate course that teaches African American history. Moving forward, this actually falls into their burden that they placed on us and how we responded to it. Now, they want to keep bringing up that they put the burden on us and we did not reject it. And that is correct. We didn't have to reject it because we solved it. Their burden was, how can we prove that our motion is bettering teaching of African American history? And just that, by allocating more time a whole course to be dedicated towards the teaching of African American history, you don't have to water it down or only focus on the large details. You can pick into those more obscure, minute details to really give a more encompassing American history learning experience, which solves the burden that they placed on us. So as much as they want to say that we did not reject it, correct, we did not reject it, we acknowledged it, and we solved it. Conversely, however, they rejected our burden because they could not counter it. They were incapable of providing specific examples of how this proposal is inherently detrimental to student learning. Their points, primarily, especially about no solvency, for example, would make the course ineffective, quote unquote, but is not proving any harm. This kind of goes into one of our overarching themes that we need to start somewhere. As we both agreed, we need to have a more encompassing approach on American history, and we need to provide more American history education. We need to start somewhere. Unless you can prove that this is specifically detrimental to students' learning, then it is worth a shot. Because all of your points thus far, as we had proven, were really just about, it's not good enough, it's not going to be efficient, but it's not, you guys have said it yourself, it's not detrimental, and we agree that it needs to be done, so why don't we start somewhere? Especially when, again, we did actually prove reasons why that it would be effective. Moving forward, this actually ties into our rebuttal for their third contention, which they state that we did not rebuttal, but we did. In which we talked about how essentially what our third speaker was getting at was the supply and demand aspect of this, African American education. Now when they mentioned that this would be a world schools debate and we were talking about the world, now obviously we could acknowledge the fact that some motions actually do implicitly kind of imply that they're referring to the US specifically, but let's go with their angle and say that we're referring to the whole world. The more people that are educated on a topic, the more people will be able to educate others. Creation of jobs in this field will incentivize people to be educated on African American history, which as our third speaker stated, this kind of touches on the fact that we think we need to start somewhere, and by doing so, this completely disproves their point about how we wouldn't have enough, because in time, it would be a cycle that would improve itself. Lastly, I just want to touch upon the fact that they continuously misquoted our contentions when nowhere in our contentions did we state that African American history was kept from schools. In fact, I can even give you the wording of our contentions. One, school curriculums currently do not provide adequate African American history. Second, they are a proponent of continued systemic and individual racism. And third, American historical achievements are significant contributors to Americans' overall success. Nowhere in there did we say that was kept from schools. They kept consistently bringing this up as a point, but it's null and void because nowhere in the wording did we say that. And for those reasons that I just stated, I urge you to vote in favor of the affirmation. Thank you all for your time and attention, and thank you guys for a wonderful debate. Congrats on making it to finals.